Alrighty, folks, here we go. It's time now for the General Knowledge Podcast, Season 7, Episode 4. And for this one, folks, I do have a returning guest to the show. He was with me way back in October 2023, and we did do it was mainly for a member show. Geez, I think we were getting close to 2.5, 3 hours, I think, when we did the show. So the everyday podcast, for all the listeners out there, you guys pretty much got the first hour of that discussion, and then we split that one, and the members got to have all the extra content for that show. But he's back again. We do have Mike Williams, the Sage of Quay. He is back on the show, coming to us live from the US. And we're going to go just to recap on a little bit of the Beatles conspiracy, which was the show, and the extra content we did was basically all about the Paul is dead part of that conspiracy as well. But we're going to touch on a few other topics today for this show. Catch up again with Mike just to see how he's going. But Mike, it's great to have you, mate. Thank you for once again sparing the time all the way from the other side of the world over there in the States, mate. Great to have you with us.
Thank you, Lee. Thank you for inviting me back.
No worries, mate. So, obviously, been going through your website there. I did notice that you got censored. Is that right? You were Google clamped down on you and cancelled your blog or something at one point.
It's happened a couple of times with the blog.
Assholes, I tell you what, far out.
Yeah, so they must have done it, I would say, 3 or 4 times over the years. I would have to change the blog URL by creating a new blog, and that's how I stayed afloat. But what I've done, I guess a few months back, is I created the same blog. It's mirrored on Substack, and there's no issues on Substack.
Yeah, that's good. Because whenever I see you posting on X, because I'm on X fairly often just to sort of touch base with what's happening over there, I always see that's where your links seem to be posted to. Your Substack links seem to always go to X. So I was like, oh, you're no longer a Blogspot. And then I went to I sort of searched for your website again from the emails we'd had. And I was like, oh, no, you've still got that one. Then I was like, oh, no, it got cancelled. And then you had to start another one up. Like, yeah, my goodness, man, geez. I'll tell you what, I'm with WordPress. I've been with WordPress since like 2012. And they've... to be honest, I think they've been pretty good. They've never cancelled me. They've never censored anything. To be honest, I thought they've been quite good. And one of my brothers in arms, Ethan from TOTTnews.com, he's also hosting through WordPress as well, and he's never had any issues as well. So something to be mindful of, I guess, if you do get cancelled once again and you get sick of it. There are alternatives. I know you're on Substack, like you said. How's that going anyway? Is it subscriber content, like as in, because I know people can make money off their posts and stuff there too.
Yeah, what I do is I do everything for free.
Yes.
I don't put it behind a paywall.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of this stuff really should be free because it's information that people need. I get donations. People will send donations to me. But
yeah, so do I. Yeah.
There are costs incurred with what we do.
Yeah.
So hard drives I've had to replace, monitors, software to do the editing. There are costs to do this type of work, so sometimes we do have to have some money come in.
Yeah, I'm actually quite a fan of the James Corbett style of doing things. You know, he basically puts everything up for free, but he's also got, like, if you want to subscribe and pay money, then you'll get stuff as well. But it's still available for everyone. You know, and he puts a lot of information out there, but he's got a lot of support just because of that fact that he gives it all away for nothing, basically, you know. So, and a lot of that, you know, that goodness of putting that out there comes back to him tenfold, you know. So it's a pretty good model and good way of doing things, I think. But anyway, enough of that sort of stuff, mate. It was let's just do a quick recap now. For the listeners out there, if you are new to the show or you've only been listening for a little while, I will put a link in the show notes for this episode to go back and listen to our previous conversation. And I will urge folks, if you want to grab the full content of all that, feel free to go over to patreon.com and you can sign up over there and grab the full episode. It's, like I said, it's nearly 3 hours that we did talking about that stuff. Or the Buy Me a Coffee. Again, same price, the same content, but the Buy Me a Coffee one doesn't charge you any extra like Patreon now does. If you're doing it on iOS, bloody Apple, I tell you what, they've slapped on a 30% fee, those pricks. But it's greed, man. I tell you what, far out. So yeah, head over there and you can grab the extra stuff. I don't care if you only just join for a month, binge it all, and leave. That's fine. I'm happy with anything, to be honest. I'm grateful for all the support I do get. So in saying that, yeah, so that show, it was, to this day, it's actually still one of my favorite episodes, to be honest, Mike. It was so good. It was very in depth. You took us from the beginning all the way through to now. Covered. I don't think you left anything out, to be honest. It was excellent. And the reason why I wanted to get you back on was to touch on a few other things that maybe some of the paths that we didn't go down in that discussion, which weren't exactly pertinent to the Beatles conspiracy, but still over the whole thing, it does envelope in with it a bit. And we'll get to that in a little bit. But that episode, mate, was wonderful. And I had a lot of good feedback on that too. I did have my colleague Andy with us on that episode as well. He was thinking about coming on today if he was free, but he's unavailable today. But afterwards, when we chatted about it, he was like, he goes, I was just so dumbfounded with all the information. He was like just sitting there soaking it all in, and he couldn't believe it. It was just crazy. And when I asked him just recently as well about coming back on with you as well, he's like, he goes, I remember talking to you. I went and spoke to my parents about the Beatles and was trying to tell them all this stuff and everything. Goes, it was just they wouldn't hear a bar of it. It was too much for them, And I find that pretty interesting that some people, even with what's been uncovered and how interesting it is, people still don't want to believe it. They want the fantasy that they were the magic boy band that came out of nowhere.
It was the soundtrack of their life, Lee, as it was.
That's it
for me.
Well said.
It's very difficult to let it go. I had a tough time too. It was a hard pill to swallow, but.
And that's one of the things I wanted to actually pick your brain about. So how did you go from, what was it that made you go, wait a minute, what's going on here with these Beatles guys? Like, what was the switch for you? Why were you, of your generation, so different to others that didn't want to believe it? Like, what was different about you, do you think?
I was a little Beatle freak, Lee, going back to when I was a kid. I remember begging my parents to take me and my brother's about 14 months younger than I am, to go see Yellow Submarine in 1968 in the movie theater. I mean, I knew about the Beatles when I was in 68. I was 9 years old. So, and I knew about the whole Paul is dead conspiracy going into the early 1970s, the mid 70s. That's when I was really, really listening to Beatle music, when I was in middle school.
So was it that part of it, like that someone came to you, or you came across that knowledge that Paul was replaced? Is that what planted the seed for thinking that the whole thing was something funny about this? Is that what it was?
No, originally, if you were into the Beatles and a Beatle freak like I was, you knew about the Paul is dead theory.
Right.
But myself, like so many other people, like 99.9% of people who are into the Beatles, just chalked it up as a clever, witty marketing ploy by the Beatles to have a play with their fan base. In fact, it did sell more records, because once the conspiracy had gotten some traction in 1969, people went back to buy Beatle records to take a listen to backmasking on the albums and the clues on the album covers and stuff like that. So it did have that effect. But for me, I always thought that Paul was Paul. Like I said, I just thought it was a marketing ploy. And so then what happened was, in 2016, in the early part of 2016, I was on Amazon looking for a book on the Beatles. I was just perusing, and I came across the Memoirs of Billy Shears. Amazon had recommended it, so I took a look. I looked at the write-up, and I thought, well, this is interesting. Let me take a look at this. I've never heard of the book, and it said it was historical fiction. So I wasn't expecting a whole lot out of it, just maybe some fun reading. So this was the original edition, the original pressing that was published back in 2009, September of 2009. And the book is 666 pages and 66 chapters, so it's got its occult aspect of it. And I cover a lot of aspects.
I remember that.
With the Beatles and the occult as an entity. They are immersed in it. But in any case, so I got the book and I read it, and I started reading it, and it was blowing my mind, because what was being told in the book, even though it's classified as historical fiction, was so contradictory to the official narrative. It just cut right across the grain. And the amount of information in the book was phenomenal. So when I was reading it, I took a step back. I had to pause and say, okay, so all of this information had to come from either somebody who was very close to the Beatles within their inner circle, or from the guy who claims is playing the part of Paul McCartney. I refer to him as Billy Shears.
Mm-hmm.
There are many, many songs in the book, lyrics from Beatles songs, and what we have to understand is that you just cannot put song lyrics in a book. Some people think you can. You could just throw them in there and there's no problem with copyright. That's not true. And in fact, I validated that with two attorneys. One is a friend of the family, and the other one is my personal attorney. He does intellectual property. And I flat out asked both of them, I said, can you take lyrics from a song and just put them in a book? Are there any issues with that? And both of them came back and said, don't do it unless you have permission.
Yeah, because copyright infringement, right.
Copyright infringement. And then I had a discussion with Mike Stock, and Mike is out of the UK, and Mike is a very talented songwriter going back into the 1980s. To this day, he's still in the business. And I was talking to Mike one day, and he had said to me that because of all the songs that he has written for other artists, that he gets requests to use his song lyrics in books. And what Mike explained to me was that whenever these types of requests come in, he needs to make sure that the lyrics are going to be used in a way that's beneficial to him. In other words, somebody's not going to trash his music, trash his lyrics, and put his music in a bad light.
Yeah, like not defamatory or anything.
Exactly. So you want to make sure that if somebody's going to use your material, that they're going to do it in a way that puts you in a good light.
Benefits you, yeah.
Benefits you, right. So in any case, so the amount of information in the book was just phenomenal. And I came to the conclusion that there's a lot more here than just this book that claims to be historical fiction, that there's something deeper embedded within the book. So as I got more and more into it, I began to realize that the book was encoded. It's like a big puzzle.
And can I just interrupt there, Mike? You mentioned, I believe, on the last show we did, that there are, was it bolded words? There were parts of sentences, or every so many sentences, if you take the first word, it creates another sentence or something. So there's coding within the book as well?
Yes. So Tom Uharriet, who was the, quote, encoder, some will refer to him as the author, but Tom himself refers to himself as the encoder. Tom is trained in encoding. And we had a conversation going back, it was an email exchange going back, I've been doing this for 8 years, I want to say maybe 6 to 7 years ago.
I was going to ask you if you'd actually contacted the author, actually.
Oh, yeah. In fact, I contacted Tom going back 8 years ago when I first got into it because I had no idea that I was going to get this deep into it. And after I read the book, I said, well, I'd like to have this guy come on my show and we could talk about the book. And originally Tom had said, yeah, he could do it. And about a week later, he wrote me and he said, Mike, I can't do any podcasts. I can't do any interviews. So I didn't get into it with him, but I assumed what happened was he probably had to run it by an attorney to say, hey, look, I have an opportunity to promote this book and I can do the podcast circuit. So what do you think? And I'm sure his attorneys came back and said, look, you've signed non-disclosure agreements, NDAs, to do this. And even if you innocently say something, you run the possibility of breaching the NDA. So it's best that you steer clear of any interviews. The book was out there, Lee, for 7 years before I started talking about it. Tom explained to me that when he was younger, and he didn't say how young, he was taught how to encode. And he explained to me that at the time, he had no idea why he was being taught this. This is how the Masonic structure works. There is grooming that takes place, and Tom is a Freemason. He admitted that to me going back early on in an email exchange that we had. He didn't go into any great detail, but he did explain that he's a Freemason. And so what they do is they have a pool of resources, skilled resources, that are within their structure. The Masonic structure it's a corporate structure, and it works the same way as a corporation does. If at the top of the corporation you have your CEO or your president decides that they're going to do something, they're going to execute a strategy, they go into the levels of the organization to go find the proper resources to pull everything together. So that's exactly how it works. So Tom encoded the book. So going back to what you asked about, the bolded words, so you have these bolded words on each page of the book. So there's 666 pages, and each page has bolded words.
Is that done in the structure of the book as you're reading? Is that done sort of like as an emphasis on that word, or is it just random? Like, how did they sneak it in there to make it seem legit? Like, if people are reading it and they kind of just miss it, and they're not going, "Why is that bolded? That shouldn't be bolded." Like, or is it like, "Oh, that makes sense. It's bolded." You know what I mean?
When you first read it, you are asking yourself, why is that bolded? Why is the word Paul bolded out? In quick order, what happens is you see there are other words that are bolded on the page. And when you read the bolded words, you realize, oh, this is a sentence.
Right. Okay.
And then there's the acrostical code. The acrostical code is where the first letter of each odd numbered sentence, so the first sentence, the third, the fifth, the seventh, the ninth, and so on, when you read it vertically, it forms more words and more sentences. Then Tom, in 2018, I believe it was 2018 with the 9 after 909 edition, he introduced footnotes. Because what had happened at the time was they had the book out, and he had explained that William, or Billy, didn't think the book was progressing enough. It wasn't moving along enough. Not enough people knew about it. Or when they read the book, they weren't piecing a lot of the cryptic aspects of the book together to fully understand the message that was being delivered. The original writing of the book, and even the current versions, when you read the narrative, it could be a little coy, and you're asking yourself, what are they really saying here? So, in 2018, footnotes were introduced. And so at the bottom of many of the pages within the book, it cuts to the chase. Tom might start the footnote by saying, well, what William is actually saying here is, and then he goes on to explain what the paragraph or two above was describing. So that was another piece of it. I don't want to say that was encoding, but
did those footnotes discuss the coding? Was it to do with the coding? It was just
in the beginning of the book, Tom explains about word stacking. When you first open up the book, the first few pages, it thanks Sir Paul McCartney for the valuable information, and then he also explains about the word stacking. So up front, you're told that the book has a level of encoding.
Right, okay. And that's only in the latest edition, though? Or is that in any edition?
The word stacking and the acrostical code were in the book from the very beginning.
Yeah, yeah. But that explanation, though, that explanation that you just described.
Yeah, that was, I believe it was also in the original red book. I don't have it with me right now. I'd have to go back and take a look. But clearly in the blue covered book, which became the second, third, fourth editions of the book, it's there. There's also another level of encoding in the book. It's referred to as the whisper messages. So what are the whisper messages? So on many of the pages, not all of them, either at the top of the page, on the side of the page, or at the bottom of the page, in very light font, there are other passages and other sentences that add to the narrative of the book. Also, what the book does is it invites people to go outside the book to do additional research to either prove the book as being true or maybe something that you thought might be true is not. So the book actually invites you to go out and go do that. That's what happened with me when I got into the whole thing with their music, whether they wrote all their own music and played on all of their recorded tracks. There was a passage on page 350. I forgot which edition it was. Maybe the 2018 edition, I think. On page 350, going into page 351, where it said something to the effect, I'm going to paraphrase here, and George Martin was going to take their little songs and make them big, make them hits. And I thought, well, that's kind of an odd thing to say. Weren't Paul McCartney and John Lennon prolific genius songwriters? Why is it telling us that George Martin is going to make their little songs big hits? And then on the next page, it continues on. It talks about the Committee of 300 and the snitch. I knew about the Committee of 300, and I knew they were referring to Dr. John Coleman. Now, at that time, I hadn't read the Committee of 300, but I knew about John Coleman because he was doing lectures, and I would watch the videos over the years. Right. In fact, one of them is on my main YouTube channel from many years ago, a long time ago. I uploaded it maybe 2 or 3 years ago, but it goes back into I think into the 1990s. So I knew who he was, and then that made me go out, read the Committee of 300, and that shed additional light on the story about the Beatles. So that's what it was doing. And in its own narrative, it was pointing to other books to fill out the narrative, to make it larger, because otherwise the book would be 666,000 pages if it
Right.
included everything. So it was asking people to go outside. And the other thing that the book does, it's very interesting the way they did this. So people will ask me what parts of the book are fiction and which parts of the book are not. And the answer to that question is you have to do the research to figure out which pieces of the book are nonfiction and which pieces of the book are actual fiction. But what the book has built in for reasons of plausible deniability is the actual fictional aspects of the book is left to the reader. So what does that mean? If you're reading the book and you don't believe that the Beatles had linkages into the philosophy and the ideology of Aleister Crowley, then that part of the book to you is fictional. Because many people will read those chapters in the book and say, oh, it just can't be. The Beatles were connected into Crowley, and that's just nonsense. That's part of the historical fiction or the fictional aspects of the book. It's the same thing with Billy telling us in the book, through Tom, that he played the role of Vivian Stanshall in the Bonzo Dog Band with Neil Innes. Now, many people will know who Neil Innes is because he was one of the originators of the Beatles parody band, the Ruddles. So Billy and Neil were very close, and they played in the Bonzo Dog Band. And so in the book, he flat out tells us that he played that role. And there are people that don't believe that. They'll say, no, that can't be. It can't be that he played the role of Vivian Stanshall. So that part of the book is also fiction. So what happens is, as people are going through the book, it's what they don't want to believe that becomes fiction to them. It's very, very clever the way it's put together. So the way to go about the book is not to read it and then when you come across something that you're thinking, well, that's crazy. How can that be? Instead of just chalking it up and saying it can't be, the book is saying, go research it. Go take a look and see whether we're telling you the truth or not.
Yeah.
So this was the adventure that I embarked on, and for 8 years. I wrapped up the ongoing everyday research going back to last November, because 8 years with anything is enough. I still do talks about it like you and I are chatting about it, but the day in and day out research is done. That's how the book is put together. And what a lot of people, even people who claim to have read the book, what they don't understand is the book is giving you so much insight into how the controlling matrix works, how the control system works. It's all occulted. The world is run by occultists. And it gives you a peek behind the door. You know, you pull the curtain back and you see the great Oz back there pulling the levers. Well, it goes even deeper than that. So it goes into the philosophy of Thelema and Crowley, which is the
Do what thou wilt.
doest thou wilt.
Yeah.
And I have deducted that that is the dominant spiritual philosophy of those within the pyramid of power. Thelema is very high up in the chain. It talks about magic, ritual, occultism, the esoteric, mysticism. It gets into numbers, numerology, which is how the occultists, how they communicate out and to themselves. We see this all the time with all of these events. We can even get into it if we talk about Donald Trump, who was the 45th and 47th president. 45 is 9, 47 is 11, 9, 11.
Oh, yeah, I missed that one. That's a good one. I like that. And the whole 9/11 thing too, that when Paul was apparently killed and replaced, wasn't it?
September 11th of 1966. That's what the book tells us, yeah. We have September 11th of 2001. 9/11, the date.
Oh, it's heavily occultic. Yeah.
It's hard, yeah, it's heavily occulted. It's considered by the controllers to be a day of war, and that could be physical war, or it can also be psychological war. So, and then you have 9/11 encoded events as well, like Trump is a 9/11 encoded event. So the book also takes us into Tavistock. It takes us into secret societies. So this is all very important information. I learned a lot from it, Lee.
Well, it sounds like it taught you a lot. Well, it encouraged you to go on this
Yes.
this experience where you it's like a treasure map. You're like it's laid it out for you and gone, here's the clues. Now go follow it. But do you think this book played a part in that for you, in taking you down this path?
That's a very good question. Trust me, there were days when I have said outright, I have no idea how this guy from Long Island, born and raised in a blue-collar family, my father was a police officer, how I got into this. Why am I here? So I believe that in life there are things that are in the cards for us. Some people might say it's in the stars.
Mm.
A synchronicity, if you will.
Yeah.
And I think that's what happened with me. I was a guy that knew a whole lot about the Beatles. I loved the Beatles. And here I am now digging into the story that I loved. I call it the Cinderella story. I mean, who doesn't like that story? I loved it. And here I am later on in life going through it.
Yeah. The system likes to present us with heroes, doesn't it, to follow? Yeah, it's very, very scripted.
They want to give us heroes because when you have heroes, you have leaders, and when you have leaders, you have followers.
Followers, correct.
Right.
Yeah.
So they want us to be followers. But the biggest piece of it, Lee, was I was learning from it. I knew of the occult before I got into the book, but once I really dove into the memoirs of Billy Shears, I understood a lot more about the occult, about how important the Egyptian mysteries are to the controllers. So it was a benefit to me. As long as it was being beneficial to me and I was expanding my knowledge base, then I'm good with it, regardless of what other people might say or what other people might think.
There's a caveat to that, Mike, too, is that you could have looked into all of this stuff, it broadened your horizons, done all the research, followed all the rabbit holes like you have, and never said a word about it.
Right.
But you chose to go down the path of, I need to talk about this. I need to tell people about this. I'm going to write about this. I'm going to make videos about this. You know what I mean? And you chose to share that with everyone. And I think that's admirable, actually. I think that's actually an admirable thing that you've done. And I'm very appreciative of that work because it's helped me with a lot of things too and understanding stuff and broadening my horizons. But I just find that very interesting that, you know what I mean? You could have chosen not to do that, but you chose to do that, which is great.
Well, and I did it, Lee, and there was a tremendous amount of backlash. The Beatles are a cult. I call it Beatleism.
Mm-hmm.
And the fervor and the attachment that people have to the Beatles as their idols, as their gods, there was a tremendous amount of nastiness and hatred that came my way for just talking about the possibility that
How they were manufactured. Yeah.
that they were manufactured and that they were not what we were told, that there's a different story, there's another narrative. And that's all I was doing, was exploring another narrative. Now, when I was just talking about Paul being replaced, there was backlash and there was snarkiness that came my way with that. But once I got into questioning whether they wrote all their own music and whether they actually played on all the recorded tracks, that's when the firestorm came.
Mm.
You know, and I just kept going. I said, no, I'm just going to keep going. I'm not going to kowtow to people who don't want to do research, that want to stay in that world of make-believe, in the world of illusion. I'm going to keep pushing through and break through. And that's what I did. Also, even though after 8 years, Tom and I have a friendly relationship, in other words, we will trade messages back and forth or emails once in a while. In no way was I working with Tom on any of this stuff. Tom had no idea what I was working on, nor did I know what he was putting in the book. I mean, we might communicate, and the communications were typically because I had a question about something in the book. This is the passage. Am I interpreting this correctly?
So you were just seeking clarification on things,
I was seeking
really.
clarification, but over time, there was a mutual respect that I believe evolved between Tommy Harriet and myself. He was appreciative of where I was going and what I was doing with the work. And I'm sure Tom didn't agree with everything that I put out there, because contrary to what a lot of people might say, I was not always positive about Billy Shears. People would say, oh, he puts Billy in a bright light and that takes away from Paul. And I've tried to explain to people that.
I didn't get that from you at all, to be honest.
But there are people that do, because that's their default argument or position, Lee, because I'm not pumping up the Beatles' tires. So if I'm not pumping up biological Paul's tires, this basically emanated a lot out of the Paul is dead community, where they call it justice for Paul. They want to be able to put him back with the spotlight where they believe he belongs. But that was never my intent. My intent was to stay neutral and to treat Paul and Billy and everybody else that was involved as people of interest, players in the theatric that is the Beatles. So I wanted to stay neutral and objective. And there were times, like I said, where I presented material where it wasn't favorable toward Billy. And I could only guess that anybody from that circle, perhaps Tom included, might sit there and say, well, I wish he hadn't said that, or why did he go there? But the reason why I said that and the reason why I went there was because I was my own person and I was doing my own research. I wasn't attached to anybody and I didn't care what other people thought. And I always said, I'm doing this because I enjoy presenting my research. I'm not trying to convince anybody of anything. If you don't want to believe anything that I say, okay, that's your prerogative. I'm not here to beat you into submission. I learned a long time ago that that's a losing proposition. You're not going to convince people to believe something that they're not ready to jump into. So anyway, that's how it came about.
I do have another question, Mike. Tom, have you seen this person? Do you know what he looks like?
Yeah.
Tom Uharry?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So he's obviously not Billy Shears.
No.
Right. Do they know each other?
Does Tom and Billy know each other?
Yeah.
I'm going to give you my opinion. I don't know for sure, but I believe, yes, they do. But and let me just put a caveat on that. I believe that, yes, they do at a professional level. In other words, remember before I was talking about the pyramid structure and how a decision is made to do something. Well, in this case, the decision was made for Billy to disclose through the book what the Beatles are all about and who he is. And so within that corporate structure, that Masonic structure, Tom was tapped because of his skills in encoding. And so, in my view, there had to be communication between Billy and Tom in order to put the book together. Because when Tom was putting the book together, he couldn't just write it and then publish it.
Yeah, some of that stuff can't be made up. It's too precise.
Well, and it had to go back to I'm sure a review team that may or may not have included Billy, but I'm sure there were certain aspects of the book that Billy had to take interest in to make sure that it was in a zone that was, for lack of a better term, safe. And what I mean by that is because Billy does explain in the book, again through Tom, that Billy has contractual obligations that he is signed to play the role of Paul McCartney. And if he breaches the terms and conditions of that contract or contracts, then he runs a risk of getting himself involved in legal issues that could impact him financially. So, in my opinion, there had to be, and still has to be, checks and balances to make sure everything stays contained within the parameters, exposing too much and then jeopardizing his success and his financial. One of the things he says in the book is that he does have to be very careful about how he puts this stuff out, because if it backfires on him, it could impact his financial situation, and that could then roll into his family as far as their financial security and all that through him. For those who were listening, this is in the book. In fact, there was one page in the book where he put in a letter from his attorney, Billy's attorney, where there was too much information that could lead the reader to identify his parents. And he was told to get that cleaned up and don't make it so overt. Although another researcher that I'm involved in, Stacy, I believe that she may have cracked the code on who his parents are.
Yeah, I remember you mentioning that. That was fairly new, and we couldn't delve into it too much on that last show. But yeah, she's pretty confident that she's got him pegged.
We don't know for sure 100%. I mean, so we never say that it's
confidence is high.
The confidence is very high, and what I explain to people that I speak to and to my audience, that Stacy's work is extremely compelling. And what I did do was to take the show that I did with Stacy, and I sent it to Tom twice. Now, whenever I communicate with Tom, there's always a response. It's not like Tom not to respond one way or another, even if he writes back and says, I can't get into that. But I sent Stacy's presentation, the show that we did together, to Tom twice, and I never heard back. I never got a response. Now, it could be that maybe Tom just didn't get to it, or Stacy got too close to the mark. Stacy put forth a case that Billy's biological father was Douglas Hamilton of the Douglas Hamilton bloodline, Scottish bloodline, very blue blood, and his mother is the Percy bloodline, another bloodline that's considered to be blue blood. So the Douglas Hamiltons on his father's side and the Percys on his mother's side. Now, interestingly enough, in the book he says, I have Campbell relatives. So what he was saying is my name is not Billy Campbell, because some people who are doing the research in the Paul is Dead community.
Yeah, I remember hearing that it was Campbell as well, because he was a Canadian or something, or they were trying to say.
Some would say that, yeah, he came out of Canada, and
yeah.
But I don't know. Nothing that I have looked at, Lee, points to that. But in the book, he said that I do have Campbell relatives. And so when you look at the Percy bloodline on his mother's side, there's Campbell blood. So that's why I think Stacy nailed it, and that's why it went dark. Because they can't own up to it. Because if they own up to it and they admit it, then there's going to be a whole bunch of research into the Douglas Hamiltons, into the Percy bloodline, and that's just not where they want to go. We're talking about elite families, so they don't want anybody poking around, so just let sleeping dogs lie.
Yeah.
That's what I think happened.
Now, you mentioned Tom's a Freemason, right? And as is Billy. Billy's also a Freemason.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yep.
In fact, I think he's in the illuminated degree. So there were degrees above the 33 degrees of the Scottish Rite.
Yeah. I'm just going to show this for the members watching the video, just to remind people on the Jonathan Ross show. There he goes doing his little Illuminati. Someone's put bloody emojis over the top of it though, but you can see it replaying there. He does his little pyramid triangle hand sign as he sits down. No need for that, is there?
No.
Why would you do that? He's signaling. That's a signal.
Right.
Very much a signal. He's either showing who he is, who he's aligned with, or I'm not sure of the reasons why they do that. What's your guesstimation as to why he did that? Why did he do that sign just there?
Because they use the symbolism to communicate out to their inner circle. So that's what he's doing. The average person watching this, the fan, they refer to us as the profane. They don't think anything of it. It's like when he was on the Letterman show, going back to 2009. He went on that show to do an interview with Dave right after an article was released from Wired magazine out of Italy. It was the Italian version of Wired, where two forensic experts concluded that he is not biological Paul. And so that article was released in Italy. And right after that, Billy went on the Letterman show. Between him and David, they were having dialogue to downplay the whole Paul is dead conspiracy on the show. And the reason why he did that was to get ahead of what was going to be published, or what was published in Wired Italia. And in that show, he massively speaks with David Letterman. When he massively speaks, it's the same thing as him doing the triangle that we just looked at in that video. Massively speaking is a technique that Masons use where they can speak and tell the truth, but they do it in an encoded way. The same thing that symbols are encoded. So he does it all the time. He's dropping clues all the time. The Brotherhood and all the other secret societies are always displaying their symbolism all the time.
Do you think that the book is... It's definitely clues, and there's Masonic. It's written by Masons about a Mason, and it's masterfully written and spoken, I guess, as you would say, as this is a technique they use. It's encoded. Was this done as a signal to other Masons, do you think, or was this done to put that out there and just to see if anyone was able to decode it, or was it like a breadcrumb left for the people, for the masses, or in that sort of, what was that term where we talk about karma? Revelation of the method. Do you think this was a bit about revelation of the method, this book? I'd like to get your insights on that too.
Yeah, revelation of the method is attached to the Luciferian philosophy within their Luciferian belief system, that they have to balance the scales between what they do that's not so good and those things that are good. There's a balancing of the scales. A lot of times they might refer to it as the balancing between their physical existence and their spiritual existence. But just imagine a scale. As he goes about his life playing the part of Paul McCartney, many people are going to view that as a deception, even though Billy will argue, well, I haven't been deceiving you because I've been dropping the clues since day one. It's not my fault that you don't understand the encoding or the clues.
That's right.
This is how they think.
Yeah.
It's not so much that they're being coy. It's how they actually think. It's how they're bred.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's what they believe.
They're like, well, if you're not wise enough, you don't have enough wisdom to realize what I'm saying to you. That's not on me. That's your fault. Get smart, and you'll be on the same level.
Exactly. It's not my problem that you're not smart enough to figure it out. That's exactly where they come from. So I think as part of the reconciliation process, there is this piece of what Billy wants to do to put the truth out.
So do you think he's doing that because, like, I know you've mentioned that he's been saying these things and dropping clues since the start, right? Since he's been in there, song lyrics, album covers, all this sort of information that's out there. So the scales of, well, the deception is up here, right?
Right.
And he's dropping clues, and maybe he hasn't quite gotten it back to balance. So this book is now gone bang, and it's now level again. Is that what we're sort of seeing here, do you think?
Yes, the book is making it more overt.
Yeah. It's leveling the playing field.
See, people keep asking me all the time, Lee, they'll say, when is he going to disclose? When do you think he's going to do that? And my response is he already has. Read the book.
Well, he has, yeah.
He had a 666-page book written. And he's telling you. So if you just buy the book, if you're that interested, let me just put it that way. If you're that interested and you're that perplexed, buy the book for $20 or $18, whatever it costs here in the U.S.
I'm going to have to do that. I'm guilty of that. I haven't actually got the book and read the book yet. I need to do that. I will do that, yeah. I'm
referring to the people that keep hammering me. Why this? Why that? Why this? Why that? I get it all the time. And it's fine. Like I said, I know why they're asking me because I'm the guy that's brought all this to the forefront. But getting back to what we were just talking about, yes. So the book is balancing those scales, but it's also doing something else. Think about the life that Billy never had. He never lived his real life, really. He did to a certain point.
Yeah, till what, 26 or whatever? Because he's older than Paul, isn't he?
5 years older than Paul.
Yeah.
So he was born in 1937.
Right. So what age would that have been him biologically?
29.
29, right, okay.
He would have been 29. So up until he was 29 years old, he was Billy Shears.
Or Vivian Stanshall.
Or Vivian Stanshall or William Shepard or Billy Campbell. So, but obviously he had a prior life where he was a studio musician and he's formally trained.
And also used to playing parts.
And used to playing parts.
Yeah, so he's the perfect candidate.
He loves the theatrics. He really loves it. You can see it with the Stanshall character. By trade, he's a wind instrument player, keyboard player. Obviously, he's a multi-instrumentalist, can play guitar, bass, and so on. When he first emerged as Paul McCartney, and we'll just pick the Sgt. Pepper album in 1967 because that's when he appears on the front cover.
Yep.
To today, we're talking about 58 years of him playing the part of Paul McCartney.
Sworn to secrecy, yeah.
And 99.99% of the population believes that he's Paul McCartney and he's the guy that wrote all of these songs. There's a part of Billy, I believe, that wants people to understand that no. Paul McCartney didn't write these songs.
Yeah.
I wrote these songs.
I'm the genius. I'm the
guy that wrote these songs.
Yeah. It has been eating away at me as well, thinking that because I try to put myself in his shoes, right? I do with a lot of things. You've got to try and literally put yourself in their shoes and think like they think and embody that person. And I was sitting there thinking over the last few days when I was really listening to the show and stuff thinking, imagine how tough it is to play someone else your entire life just about, or the majority of your life. And you would be sitting there thinking, this motherfucker that I'm playing is getting all the credit and I'm not getting none of it. And you want to be like, I'm going to fucking put it out there. I'm going to put it out there. I'm going to give clues. I'm going to leave breadcrumbs just so at least there's a portion of the population that goes, I see what you've done there. I see what you've done. I know.
I think, Lee, that's a big motivator. a big driver as to why
Of
he did what he
course.
did.
Yeah, and I've been thinking about what motivates someone to do that. What would That's got to be it. That's got to be it for sure. I can't think of anything else, unless there's some sort of obviously like they like to blackmail and control people. But I don't think he was blackmailed to be controlled. I think they threw the fame and fortune at him and went, we can do this. We can do this. We will control this narrative, and you'll be this guy, and you'll have fame and fortune for the rest of your life. Will you sign on? And if you divert from that path, we'll kill you or we'll do something, but you'll have everything you've ever wanted, You couldn't get that fame being Billy. We'll give you this fame if you be Paul.
Yeah, he comes from an elite bloodline, like I mentioned. So with these elite bloodlines, what happens is they are brought along, they're groomed, they're handled, they have, their education is very different than our education.
Yeah.
He mentions in the book that he was subjected to trauma-based mind control
programs.
Right.
And we'll get into that a bit too.
His earliest memory was when he was 3 years old. He said he was tutored by Aleister Crowley for 10 years. Billy was born in 37, Crowley died in 47, so that's the 10-year period of time. But the point I'm trying to make is that he was being brought along, and at some point he was going to end up in a position of influence, a position of power, an influential position. Now, whether they knew going back when he was a kid it was going to be a band or the Beatles or whatever it may be, who knows? He would have wound up someplace where he would have been extremely successful, but he was formally trained in music, so that told me that in all likelihood they were going to move him into some kind of position where he can apply his musical skills.
Yeah, it'll be a culture-driven aspect, yeah.
Yes, because as we know, music and the entertainment industry is a gigantic tool in the toolbox of the controllers. So if they can leverage somebody with his talents, which is what they did, then they're going to do that. Now, whether they thought it was going to be the Beatles or some other band or in some other capacity, I don't know. So, I believe he was brought along and he was given all the right education and he was moved along to be on certain paths. And I was also going to mention that I have reason to believe that he was involved with the Beatles before 1966, going back to, in my view, as early as 1962, if not before. And going back about 7 years ago, there was an article in the newspapers and online where he had said that he wrote the music to the song In My Life. Now, the problem with that is...
John Lennon, wasn't it?
It was John Lennon's song. And he said he wrote the music. And so the mainstream media went into damage control. And they said that Harvard University and some other university ran some computer models and they determined that he was wrong, that he misremembered writing In My Life. And nobody forgets, look, folks, I'm a songwriter.
Yeah, you know what song you wrote. Yeah.
You know what songs you wrote.
Yep.
So what Billy was doing there was another clue. He was telling everybody that I was there before you thought I was there.
Oh, yes, nice, tricky.
That's what he was doing. So that goes back to 1965.
Wow, yeah. Now, I'll just before we go any further, so I have one more thing to bring up before, because the second part of the interview will, again, it'll be for members only, and this first half will be just for everyone else as well, as per the last episode as well. I have one more thing to bring up, and I will play this, because unfortunately I cannot play audio via Skype on my Mac. It doesn't let me do that. But let me just, because this is going to go in with one of my questions that I have for you. So let me just screen share this, and I'll try and cue this up at the same time. Now, this is, just for context for the listeners, this is Olivia Harrison, George Harrison's wife, approaching Paul, or Billy, behind backstage at a concert, right? And Paul, Billy, is being interviewed by someone on camera. Now, let's play this. Hopefully it comes up all right. If not, I can play it again, but here we go.
What's it like to do what? It's lovely. Look, excuse me, I've got to say hello to my friends.
Hello.
Are you all right?
Thank you. I'm going to run away.
We're going to go on there. Thank you.
So there you go. So George Harrison's wife, Olivia, who Billy has known for a very long time, walks up to Billy and says, "Hello, Billy."
Hello, Billy. and back to Billy, the yellow dress was Heather Bell. She was pregnant with Beatrice at the time. And people will ask me, do you think Heather knew that he wasn't Paul McCartney? I said, yes, she knew. I mean, right there. Otherwise, she would have said, why are these people calling you Billy?
Yeah, exactly. So so that to me obviously lends me to believe that many of the inside circle know the truth about this, and have also most likely been sworn to secrecy. You know, this is everything you've loved, everything you have, all the fame for it. It'll all come to an end if you let this slip. You need to keep your mouth shut and just keep the lie going, obviously until I die, pretty much, or until we're all gone. And maybe some sort of pact. Who knows? But there are members of the inner circle that know the truth. Now, have you come across any other? This is my question for the last part of this first part of the interview. Have you come across any other faux pas like this in your research where it's let slip accidentally? That's, to me, I would say that's an accident, because maybe she didn't realize that the mic picked her up, or that the camera panned to her, or, to me, that looks accidental. I don't think she, realized that she's been caught out calling him Paul. That's my impression anyway. First of all, would you have the same impression? Is that your impression?
Yeah,
of that?
I don't think that Olivia would have said hello, Billy, if she was aware.
Right. So, are there any other examples of this? That's my other question. I had a follow up from the last interview, which I sort of come across listening back to it.
Dana Carvey, the comedian.
I know Dana Carvey. Yeah.
Dana Carvey had interaction with Billy going back years ago. I have a clip of Dana where he was talking to Billy about his Pipes of Peace album, which goes back into the 1980s. And Dana is speaking to somebody. He's being interviewed. And he referred to Billy as Billy in the interview.
So Dana's being interviewed as well. Looks at Paul, Billy, and he calls him Billy.
No, Paul wasn't there. He was relaying to the interviewer an interaction, a discussion that he had with right. Billy. And Dana obviously had a faux pas. He didn't think to say, I should say Paul. He came out with Billy.
Yeah.
And when he said it, he just said it. And I don't think he realized he said it, because he kept going on with
and
what
no
he
one
was
picked him up
talking
on
about.
that? No one said anything? The interviewer didn't go, who?
Not in the clip that I have, and I don't know whether that interview actually made it out in its entirety. I was told that
I wonder if it's
not.
online. Let me just see if I can dig it up quickly. Yeah, so this is another one. Okay. I didn't realize these were, there was many of these. I only knew of that Olivia Harrison one.
No, there were others. There's also a slip-up in the George Harrison documentary. It's the 2011 documentary by Martin Scorsese. Are you going to be able to play this?
Yeah, I am. I'm just trying to match the right one. Let me just give me 2 seconds here.
It's kind of like when I met Paul McCartney. I'd never even been on Saturday Night Live. He was hanging out at Lorne Michaels' house, and I had the presence of mind at that moment not to go, who wrote A Hard Day's Night, So I said, I talked about his album 1980 and the song Tug of War, and I said, that lyric in the chorus, one day we'll stand up on top of the mountain with our flag unfurled, but it won't be soon enough. And he just lit up. Oh, that was a song, I just pictured a big flag, up on the top of a mountain, And then that was it. We were fast friends after that. So I think with Billy, people like it if you take one of his obscure songs or obscure album and be very specific about a lyric that he wrote. People love that.
There it is. Another example where someone's calling him Billy.
And also, as I was mentioning, in the 2011 documentary that was directed by Martin Scorsese, it was a George Harrison documentary, Living in the Material World. There's a scene where George is sitting on the couch and Billy comes in. He has a leather jacket on. Billy walks over to George, and George gets up and they give each other a hug. And George says, "Hello, William."
Of course, Billy is short for William, as we all know.
And then starts ribbing him because he has a leather jacket on. He asks him if that's a vegan jacket. So I have that clip on my hard drive. That's going to be a little more difficult to find. But so there are situations. Also, just quickly, I've had two people that I know relay stories to me. One is another Paul is Dead researcher. I think during his day job, he does electrical work. I think it was his friend did electrical work, and he was called to go do some electrical work at a residence, and it was Paul and Linda's home. This guy that I know, his friend relayed the story, said that when he got there, he knocked on the door, and Linda opened the door, and she said, "Billy, the man is here. That's to fix whatever needed to be fixed," and he was in his studio. So the guy went back, and he was there. Billy showed him what needed to get done and what needed to be looked at. What he said was his friend at the time wasn't quite sure why she was calling him Billy. He thought maybe it was a nickname that she had for him. He didn't realize that that is his name. So there's a couple of stories like that. There's another one I have, very similar, where somebody went to go do work at the house, and again, they called him Billy at home. So there you go.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's good. Good to know. I was wondering that for a little while, even since our original interview. That I wonder if there are more instances of that popping out and coming out into the light. Yeah. Interesting. I like the ones definitely caught on camera though. Those are the best. Yeah.
Those are undeniable.
Finally, what I would like to know, how does Garth from Wayne's World, Dana Carvey, how does he know? He came. Obviously, he's explaining it there, but how does he know he's Billy? That's what I want to know.
I think certain people within the inner circle, it is known.
Maybe he's a Mason himself. I don't know.
Well, it could be.
Yeah.
George, why do you play music? Why do you still play music? Just to enjoy?
Yeah. No, we got to do something, with our lives.
Yeah.
And that's the one thing that I know what to do, how to do.
Hello, Neil. How are you? Hello, George. Nice to see you. Very nice. Hello. It's a vegetarian leather jacket. Yeah? Yes. Oh, is that a film?
Yeah, I've got you. You're looking very
I've
bright.
seen that. This is one I can see. Go on, turn it off. Yeah, I can see.
No, I don't want to turn it off. I've seen it. Sharpie, I've seen the advert for us there. Right, hold it.
Who is this?
It's John.
Oh, is it?
John Lennon of the Beatles.
Oh, that's what's her name?
That's
Who's this?
we don't know
that.
Some other lady.
God, they were horrible.
Lady of the night.
Horrible girls, weren't they?
No, George, this is a very fine leg. It's a nice bit of stocking top. Just because you graduated in the world. They're fine ladies.
All right, so for the second part now, obviously just for the members only. So I wanted to we mentioned earlier, we talked about how this was definitely, the Beatles were a Tavistock production, basically. Now, you did mention the Frankfurt School, which we didn't talk about in the original interview as well, so I wanted to touch on that as well. And how I know the Beatles were a British creation, right? Well, throughout Britain mainly. And in America, there were other performers, bands, singers, all that sort of stuff, which were also being controlled and used throughout a movement in the United States. And this, obviously, I'm referring to McGowan's book, Strange Scenes.
Right, Laurel Canyon.
From Laurel Canyon, yes. Great book. I urge everyone actually to get a hold of it. I got an audio version, a couple of years ago and listened to it. That's how I was sort of familiar with a bit of it. So it's an excellent book. But it was, talking about, actually, before we get into it, I'll bring up some of these topics. Actually, you know what? I'll save that for after. Let's quickly just touch on the Beatles part of this first, and the Frankfurt School side of things too, because that was interesting to me as well. And just if you can elaborate a little bit about that before I move into the Laurel Canyon stuff.
I did talk about Tavistock. Connected at the hip with Tavistock is the Frankfurt School, and the Frankfurt School is out of Germany. And also, interestingly enough, the Rothschilds hail from Frankfurt, Germany.
Right.
And in fact, many of the Bolshevik, Jewish, communist intelligentsia hail from Germany. It's very interesting. Germany is a hotbed for a lot of the Marxist, ultimately that evolved into communist ideology.
And just to quickly tie that in, sorry to interrupt you, Mike, with your train of thought there. To stay on that train of thought, though, but remember how we also mentioned in the first show we did that the Beatles were in Hamburg in Germany when they were learning their craft, learning to play music and sing and all this sort of stuff. And they were terrible, obviously, back in the day. But I just find that little connection there, that they were actually in Germany, and I wonder if that's where they were spotted.
That's where they were placed.
Well, yeah, well, there's a reason for that, isn't it? They could have been sent to France or somewhere else, or wherever, but they chose Germany, isn't it? You're interesting.
Hamburg was boot camp for the Beatles, and Frankfurt is only about a 6-hour drive from Hamburg, Germany. And Hamburg is a very important city in Germany, and it is considered a major media hub, even going back to the day. A friend of mine, Patrick O'Carroll, sent me some information on this several months back. And then recently, one of my listeners, who's very familiar with Germany, confirmed that, yes, indeed, it's a major media hub. And so this is the reason why the Beatles started in Hamburg. But it was boot camp. I have speculated that the Beatles were in all likelihood in programs themselves and groomed and handled from an early age. How early? I don't know. But surely by the time they got to Hamburg, they were in those programs. So the reason why they were there was because Tavistock needed to develop their performance skills so that when Tavistock threw the switch for Beatlemania, they were ready to hit the road running. And the Beatles would be quick studies as far as learning the songs that were taught to them, that they were actually credited with writing. And based upon my work, as many people who know my work know, they didn't write any of those early songs. They were written for them. That's what Hamburg was about.
I think you're onto something there too, Mike, that they were definitely probably groomed and picked for this earlier on.
Yeah.
Because otherwise I'm sitting there thinking, why them? They could have picked anyone. They could have picked any band coming up or whatever. They could have just gone, whatever band they see at the club that night and gone, oh, we'll get those guys. Why them?
Right.
They had to have been prepared earlier on, surely. There's got to be.
Well, also, Lee, if we go on to the internet and you look up the Beatles and bird cages, so birdcage symbolism in Illuminati symbolism.
You showed me some of that in the member content last time, yeah.
Yeah, that's mind control.
Mm.
And so we have images of Paul McCartney and George Harrison, bird cages on their heads. We have images of John Lennon with his head next to a bird cage, and he's in a Superman outfit. And a Superman outfit has to do with the Übermensch. It goes back to Nietzsche. It's the whole elite vision of the augmented human being,
right.
The superhuman. So that's why I had surmised that I believe in all likelihood, or I should say this, the possibility that they were in programs is likely. So they just didn't get picked randomly.